I want you to imagine for just a second a standard record player.
Okay.
Just picture it sitting there in your living room, or maybe it's just gathering dust in your parents' basement.
Right.
Is it just a machine designed to, passively play back music someone else recorded, or could it be a musical instrument just sitting there waiting to be mastered?
I mean, for the vast majority of people, it is absolutely just a playback device, right? You put the needle on the groove, you sit back, and you just listen.
You just let it play.
Exactly. But for the subculture we are diving into today, that spinning platter is, it's essentially a blank canvas. It's a tool for live, rhythmic reconstruction.
And that radical shift in perspective, that's exactly what we're exploring today. We're doing a deep dive into a massive, honestly, incredibly detailed column published by MMR.
Monumental Movement Record.
Right, MMR. It's published in November of 2025, and it's titled DMC World DJ Championship: The Trajectory of Turntablism's Elevation to World Culture.
It is a phenomenal piece of research. It really is, because the author they don't just list out a timeline of winners and losers.
No.
They actually map out the entire cultural and technological evolution of this completely unique art form.
Which is our exact mission for this deep dive. We wanted to take you on that journey. We're going to guide you through how the DJ evolved from simply being, the person playing background records at a club.
Right. The human jukebox.
Yeah, exactly. From that to becoming a high-tech musical artist, a literal athlete, and ultimately we'll look at how a global community rallied together to protect their culture.
To really appreciate the magnitude of this evolution, though, we need to set the historical stage.
Definitely.
The source takes us all the way back to 1983 in the United Kingdom. This is when the DMC, which stands for the Disco Mix Club, was founded.
The Disco Mix Club.
Right. But you have to understand, it did not start as this global battleground for turntable athletes. Not at all. It started out merely as a record pool service.
Meaning they just mailed records to people.
Yeah. Essentially, yes. They provided exclusive remix tracks for professional club DJs all across Europe.
Okay.
You have to remember the context of the early 80s here. Club culture was really growing, and being a DJ was just starting to become a recognized full-time profession.
Right.
But at that time, DJing was simply about mixing tracks seamlessly. The entire goal was to keep people on the dance floor.
So basically no dead air.
No dead air, no awkward silences, and certainly no flashy tricks.
You weren't scratching.
Oh, definitely not. You were not scratching the record. It was entirely about having a great track selection and making these smooth, invisible transitions from one disco or pop song to the next.
Okay, let's unpack this, because 1985 is the year everything starts to shift.
It really is.
The founder of DMC, Tony Prince, has this wild idea. He looks at what these club DJs are doing and he thinks, what if we turn this creativity into a live competition?
A radical concept at the time.
Totally. So he hosts the very first DMC World DJ Championship in London. But according to the source, even that first competition was still just about who had the best track selection and the smoothest mixing, right?
That is correct. But what's fascinating here is how quickly the rules of engagement were entirely shattered.
It didn't take long.
Not at all. The pivotal moment arrives just 1 year later, in 1986. An American competitor named DJ Cheese enters the championship.
DJ Cheese.
DJ Cheese. And he doesn't just push the boundaries, he throws the entire rulebook out the window.
But wait, if the whole point of the DMC at that time was smooth, invisible transitions to keep the crowd dancing, didn't DJ Cheese just completely alienate the judges?
Oh, there was...
Was there a massive backlash from the traditional DJs?
There was absolute shock. DJ Cheese debuted a routine that was not about smoothly blending two disco tracks together.
Right.
It was aggressive, it was highly rhythmic, and it was deeply rooted in the emerging hip-hop scene from the United States. He wasn't playing songs. He was using the turntable to manipulate sound.
And the crowd loved it.
The crowd went absolutely wild for it.
The source mentions he was heavily utilizing scratching and beat juggling. Now, for anyone listening who isn't a DJ, how do those two things actually differ?
Good question.
Because scratching is just moving the record back and forth, right?
Broadly speaking, yes. Scratching is manually moving the vinyl back and forth under the stylus to create rhythmic sounds, and you're simultaneously using the audio mixer's crossfader to cut the sound on and off.
Right, chopping it up.
Exactly. But beat juggling is a whole different beast.
Okay, how so?
Imagine you have two identical copies of the exact same record. Let's say it's a funk track with a great 3-second drum solo.
Okay, two turntables, same exact record on both.
Right. Beat juggling is the art of manually looping that 3-second drum solo infinitely.
Infinitely.
Infinitely. You play the drum break on turntable A. Right as it ends, you cut the mixer over to turntable B, which you have manually queued up to the exact start of that same drum break. And it gets crazier. While B is playing, your hands are flying back to turntable A, physically spinning the record backward to find the start of the drum break again before turntable B finishes.
It sounds incredibly stressful.
It is a frantic, highly coordinated physical dance. You are essentially creating a brand new, continuous drum track live on stage.
Out of just one tiny section of a record.
Precisely. And DJ Cheese brought this to a European competition that was expecting smooth disco blends. He completely upended the standard.
Changed everything.
Everything. From that single 1986 performance onward, turntablism, the art of physically manipulating the record, was established as the ultimate winning metric in the DMC.
You can almost draw a line in the sand right there.
Yeah.
Pre-1986, you're playing the song. Post-1986, you are the song.
Exactly.
And the source notes how this accelerated between 1988 and 1990.
Yeah.
You had DJs like Aladdin, Cutmaster Swift, and Cash Money stepping up.
The legends.
Yeah. They began treating records not as finished pieces of music, but as raw materials.
The phrase the MMR column uses is rhythm reconstruction, which perfectly captures what was happening.
Rhythm reconstruction, I love that.
It's so accurate. These artists were taking a tiny fraction of a second of sound, a single snare drum hit, a tiny vocal chop, a horn blast.
Just tiny fragments.
Right. And they were physically manipulating the vinyl to create entirely new, complex drum patterns. The turntable officially crossed the threshold from a consumer playback device into a sampler and a drum machine.
I'm just picturing the sheer physical dexterity that requires. Your hands have to be moving at lightning speed.
Absolutely.
And as we move into the 90s and 2000s, what the source calls the analog golden age, all of this wild, chaotic, experimental energy starts to get formalized.
It had to.
It becomes a structured art form.
You really can't have a legitimate world championship without a standardized format.
True.
So in the 1990s, the DMC established the legendary 6-minute routine format. This became the gold standard for the individual World DJ Championship.
6 minutes sounds relatively short, though. I mean, why was that the magic number?
Well, 6 minutes might sound short if you were just passively listening to a song. But for a turntablist, it is a physical marathon mixed with a high-speed chess match.
Chess match.
Yes, because they are packing dozens of different records, rapid-fire beat juggling, intricate scratching solos, and crowd hype moments, all into a 360-second window.
Oh, man. So it's incredibly dense.
Incredibly dense, and the pressure is immense. One tiny slick of the hand, one skip needle, and the entire routine falls apart.
Game over.
Pretty much. And the DMC didn't stop there either. They also introduced head-to-head battles, specifically the battle for world supremacy and the World Team Championship.
And this formalized structure really paved the way for a massive shift in the global balance of power.
It did.
The source highlights the absolute explosion of Japanese talent on the world stage starting in the late 90s. Like in 1997, DJ Qbert joined the DMC as a judge.
Having DJ Qbert as a judge was a massive symbol of international recognition for the Japanese scene.
It was validation.
Exactly. It proved that turntablism was no longer just an American or British phenomenon. It was truly global.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the year 2000. According to the column, 2000 is a landmark year because DJ Kentaro became the first Japanese world champion.
A huge milestone.
But the detail that really stood out to me is that he didn't just win. He achieved the highest score in DMC history up to that point.
To understand why Kentero's victory was such a paradigm shift, you have to look at the anatomy of his routine.
Break it down for us.
The source breaks it down beautifully.
Yeah.
Prior to Qbert, a lot of battle routines were basically just showcases of aggressive, rapid-fire technical tricks.
Just showing off.
Right. It was about proving how fast your hands were.
Just overwhelming the judges with speed.
Exactly. But Kentero's routine wasn't just a display of technical fireworks. It was a masterclass in unprecedented musicality.
Musicality.
Yes. He brought a level of compositional structure to the 6-minute routine that raised the bar for everyone on the planet.
So it wasn't just noise.
Not at all. He paced his performance with intros, build-ups, melodic solos, and explosive finales. He proved you could be blindingly fast, but still create something that felt like a beautifully composed, cohesive piece of music.
He treated it like a symphony rather than just a sparring match.
It's a great way to put it.
And he really opened the floodgates. The source gives a huge shout-out to other Japanese legends who followed his lead.
Yes, so many greats.
Guys like DJ Yesa, DJ HIC, and of course the incredible Team Qbert, who went on to win the team championship 5 times in a row.
5 times.
5 consecutive world titles in a discipline that requires flawless, live, mechanical perfection. That's insane to me.
It is an astonishing level of dominance, and it all happened right on the precipice of the next massive shift in DJ culture.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the 2000s brought the tech evolution. We go from a purely analog world of digging through crates of heavy vinyl records to the introduction of DVS.
DVS, that stands for Digital Vinyl System.
Right.
These were platforms like Final Scratch, Serato, and Traktor. And to say their introduction was revolutionary and heavily contested is an understatement.
I can only imagine the purists losing their minds over computers entering the battle scene. Like, you're just pressing play on a laptop.
Oh, the debate was fierce.
But the DMC officially permitted the use of DVS by 2006. So, how does DVS actually work, though? How do you combine a laptop with a physical record?
It is an incredibly clever piece of technology. DVS allowed DJs to control digital audio files on their laptops using a special physical vinyl record on the turntable.
Okay.
This special record doesn't have music pressed into it. Instead, it has a continuous high-pitched timecode tone.
Like an audio signal.
Yes. The turntable plays that high-pitched tone into the mixer, which sends it to a sound card connected to the laptop.
So the laptop is listening to the tone.
Exactly. The software reads that tone to instantly determine the exact speed and direction the record is moving. So when you pull the physical record backward with your hand, the software reads the reverse time code and plays your digital MP3 backward in real time.
That is genius. So you got the tactile, analog feel and resistance of the turntable, but with the infinite library of a computer.
Precisely. It fundamentally changed the game, because now you weren't limited to the sounds pressed onto a physical record you happened to find in a dusty crate somewhere.
You could create unlimited custom edits.
Unlimited. You could load up any sound imaginable, a movie quote, a synthesizer chord, your own voice.
And the source points out that this opened the door for entirely new techniques, particularly what they call tone play and melodic scratching.
Tone play is fascinating because you could map different musical notes or cue points to the digital file. You could tap buttons on your mixer to change the pitch of the sound you were scratching.
So you're changing notes on the fly.
Yes. You could literally play the turntable and mixer combination like a piano keyboard, scratching out recognizable melodies instead of just rhythmic percussion.
Which brings us to one of the most visually dense parts of this MMR column, the scratch taxonomy.
A very detailed section.
The author actually charts out the evolution of scratch techniques decade by decade. And I have to admit, looking at the names of these techniques, it reads like a martial arts manual.
It really does.
You have the flare, the crab, the hydroplane. I have no idea how you physically perform a crab scratch.
The physical mechanics of these techniques are mind-boggling when you break them down. The taxonomy tracks the progression of complexity beautifully.
Where does it start?
Well, in the 80s, you had foundational moves. The baby scratch, which is just moving the record forward and backward with no mixer involvement.
Just hand on the record?
Right. Or the transformer, where you rhythmically click the crossfader on and off while moving the record.
Making that stuttering sound.
Exactly. Which makes it sound similar to the 80s cartoon robots.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the 90s stuff? You mentioned the crab.
The 90s is when things got hyper fast. The crab scratch is a perfect example.
Walk me through it.
To do a crab, the DJ tenses their hand and rapidly drums 4 fingers, pinky, ring, middle, index, sequentially across the crossfader.
Like tapping on a desk.
Exactly like tapping on a desk.
Yeah.
And while doing that, the thumb acts as a spring to push the fader back after each finger hits it.
That sounds impossible to do fast.
It creates a blistering machine gun-like stutter effect that sounds like a continuous roll. Or take the flare scratch,
Flare.
where the fader starts in the on position and the DJ rapidly cuts the sound off into tiny rhythmic slices. It requires incredible finger independence.
My forearm is cramping just thinking about drumming my fingers that fast while my other hand is perfectly controlling a spinning piece of plastic.
It takes years of practice. And as you mentioned with DVS in the 2000s, it evolves from pure rhythmic speed into those melodic pitch-shifted arrangements.
Right.
But it is crucial to understand that none of those techniques, from the basic baby scratch to the most complex tone play, would be physically possible without the specific hardware that built this culture.
The gear. We have to talk about the gear. I feel like in this space, The equipment is practically a member of the band.
It is essential. The gear isn't just a tool, it is a co-creator, and the source makes it incredibly clear. The undisputed king, the foundational standard of the DMC and turntablism as a whole, is the Technics SL1200 series turntable.
The column basically describes it as a tank. Why was this specific record player so universally adopted? What made it so special?
It all comes down to the motor. The column highlights its legendary durability, its precision, and most importantly, the torque of its direct drive motor.
The torque.
Yes. Think about it this way. When you are aggressively pushing and pulling a heavy piece of vinyl, you are applying a lot of friction to the spinning platter underneath it.
Right, you're physically fighting the motor.
Exactly. You need a platter that instantly spins back up to the exact right speed the millisecond you let go of the record.
No delay at all.
Zero delay. Think of it like the old magic trick of pulling a tablecloth out from under a set of dishes.
Oh, I like that analogy.
It has to be instantaneous and flawless. If the motor is weak, the music drags and warbles every time you let go. The Technics 1200 provided that unrelenting, industrial-strength torque.
But the gear evolution didn't stop there, because the turntable is only half the equation. You also need the audio mixer.
Right.
The source mentions a high-torque revolution in the 90s driven by the brand Vestax.
Vestax was incredibly important. Their PMC series mixers became ubiquitous because they were designed specifically to handle the physical abuse of scratch DJs.
Because the older ones would break.
Constantly. Before Vestax, crossfaders would physically break or bleed sound after just a few months of heavy scratching. Vestax built faders that could withstand millions of high-speed impacts.
Millions. And as we moved into the hybrid analog-digital era of the 2010s, the company Rane really took the baton.
They did.
They became the official DMC sponsor. Mixers like the Rane 62 and 72 and motorized controllers like the 12, they were built from the ground up to seamlessly integrate those GVS software systems we were just talking about.
Yes, they put the digital cue buttons and loop controls directly onto the analog battle mixer.
It's a perfect example of hardware and technique constantly pushing each other forward. The DJs invent new technique, the hardware companies build gear to make it easier, which then allows the DJs to invent even crazier techniques.
A continuous feedback loop.
And that feedback loop brings us to the 2010s and the present day, where this art form starts expanding in some really unexpected directions.
Right.
We move away from just the lone DJ battling in a club.
Yes, this is where the scale of turntablism truly expands beyond the individual.
I want to paint a picture for you, our listener, of the team divisions mentioned in the source. Imagine groups like C2C from France, Qbert from Japan, or the Misfits from Canada.
Amazing groups.
We aren't just talking about a couple of guys taking turns scratching on a stage. They turned 4 independent turntables into a fully synchronized orchestra.
It is mind-blowing to watch.
How do they even coordinate that sonically?
According to the breakdowns, they operate exactly like a live band. One DJ is strictly controlling the bass line on their turntable.
Okay.
Another DJ is juggling the drum loops to keep the tempo. The third DJ is acting as the lead vocalist, scratching rhythmic vocal samples. And the fourth is adding melodic synthesizer stabs.
So it's 4 distinct parts coming together.
Yes. They had complex, raw, live band-style arrangements, and they would often synchronize their physical movements perfectly with visual elements on massive LED screens behind them.
The visuals are so important.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how this level of sophistication demanded broader cultural respect.
Absolutely.
The source notes a fascinating transition. Turntablism finally moved from the underground club scene into formal academia.
Now that is a massive leap. You can actually study turntablism at a university. What does a turntable curriculum even look like?
It looks a lot like traditional music theory, but adapted for a new interface. We started seeing turntablism being taught in dedicated DJ schools, in specialized workshops, and eventually integrated into the sound and media departments of traditional universities.
That's incredible.
They even developed specialized notation systems.
Wait, like sheet music?
Literally sheet music for scratching,
Wow.
mapping out crossfader clicks and record movements over time. The turntable was finally being evaluated and rigorously studied, not just as a piece of club equipment, but as a legitimate musical genre and a distinct, complex instrument.
But even with all that artistic growth, the jaw-dropping team routines and the academic recognition, the MMR column reveals some pretty harsh realities behind the scenes.
Financial side of things?
Yeah. Despite becoming a massive global phenomenon. The source points out that DMC expanded from representing about 10 to 15 countries in the 80s to over 40 countries by the 2010s.
And a lot of that expansion was driven by the internet, correct?
Yeah. Right. The introduction of YouTube, online qualifiers, meant a kid in a remote town who couldn't afford to travel to a capital city could suddenly compete on the world stage.
A huge democratizing force.
Huge. But despite all that global reach and massive online engagement, the DMC struggled commercially.
Which is a remarkably common story for highly specialized, community-driven art forms.
Yeah, unfortunately.
They demand incredible skill and dedication, but they aren't always massive, highly profitable commercial juggernauts. By the late 2010s, the finesseful burden of running a massive global tournament, flying in judges, renting venues across 40 countries, it became a real threat to the DMC's survival.
And this is where the story gets really inspiring. Because it wasn't a massive corporate buyout or a billionaire investor that saved the competition.
Yeah, it was.
It was the community itself.
The DMC Foundation turned to crowdfunding, and the response was a powerful testament to what they had built over the decades. Hardware brands, professional DJs who had built their careers on that stage, and passionate fans from all over the world banded together to fund the continuation of the championships.
They essentially proved that the DMC isn't just some corporate event you buy a ticket to. It is a protected cultural asset. The community actively stepped up and said, this is our heritage and we will not let this die.
And that resilience was tested again very recently, during the 2020 and 2021 pandemic, when physical events and packed clubs were completely impossible. That same community shifted entirely online.
They had to pivot.
The competition pivoted to fully remote, highly visual, heavily produced routines.
Which honestly makes sense for an art form that is so visually demanding anyway. You need to see their hands to believe what they're doing.
Exactly. And that rapid adaptation led directly to the hybrid offline and online formats we see today. It ensures the culture can survive and continue to evolve regardless of physical or geographical limitations.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look at this entire trajectory mapped out in the MMR column, it is an incredible story of human ingenuity.
Truly.
Hip-hop culture took a standard, everyday consumer playback device, a machine designed by engineers to do one very polite thing: passively play a record.
Right.
And through sheer community solidarity, relentless technical innovation, and an absolute refusal to accept the rules, they transformed it. They turned a playback device into a globally recognized musical instrument, an academic discipline, and a cultural movement that has lasted over 4 decades.
This raises an important question, though.
What's that?
When you think about the fact that a generation of kids in the 1980s could look at a standard record player, entirely hack its intended purpose, and use it to create a completely new musical language.
Yeah.
What piece of everyday consumer technology sitting in your house right now is just waiting to be subverted, misused, and turned into the next global art form?
What an incredible question to leave on. Maybe it's sitting in your kitchen or on your desk right now. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the history, the gear, and the sheer mechanical creativity of the DMC and turntablism. Keep looking at the world around you differently, and most importantly, stay insanely curious.